So this is the ecological restoration through tree planting in the global south panel. Panel discussion. Maybe a few words about the motivation for this panel. So we have the, as Sophia mentioned, the foreign ministry. Well, this Ministry of Foreign Affairs developed two programs on the project: Trees for Development, or the socio-ecological and economic dynamics of ecological restoration through tree planting schemes in global south. It's led by Maria m-Fuentes, from Hanken School of Economics, and from University of Helsinki side, here is Markus. And then we have, Markus here, also part of the project, and these two master students. Excellent. Then we have also Hanna, part of the project, maternity leave, and then and me. Who else? Well, Sophia was already, All right, so this kind of this discussion, this debate, it's this debate and discussion. We want to go deep into the concept and practices of ecological restoration, and into the pattern of trees. With the different perspectives that the panelists can present here. I will soon present panelists. Maybe I want to work before, like, why ecological restoration? Well, for example, the UN ecosystem restoration decade. There have been lots of pledges around the world to plant trees and restore degraded lands. It's a definite problem, and now it seems to be a definite solution. Okay, so we have a wonderful panel today. First, so here, Maria m-Fuentes. She's an associate professor at Hanken School of Economics, and her research has been multifaceted, but focusing on transformative alternatives, process of building sustainability from below, particularly in the sectors of food and fiber. And she has done also critical research in politics of corporate social responsibility. And for example, she's been involved with the RECO circles from the beginning. But today, how many members are now? Lots of.
That is a very difficult question, but there are food networks all over Finland and the world, inspired from our group in Vasa.
That's all. And then next, Johan Sleitis, a PhD researcher at the University of Brasilia, also affiliated to the University of Turku.
I'm doing phototherapy. Doing the same thing to university.
So you've been focusing on management of tropical forests.
Yes.
For the illustration and the higher value timber production.
Yes.
Very interesting to hear those. And then we have Markus, professor of global development studies, University of Helsinki. Markus has done research on multi-sited ethnography in all over Brazil and India, among other things, in the Arctic region, on forestry and mining, mostly. He's also co-founder of this Global Extractivisms and Alternatives Initiative, EXALT, that we have global development studies. And then we have finally Hanna Matinpuro, executive director of the Foundation for Social Movements Cooperation, well, Siemenpuu Foundation. The foundation founded by Finnish NGOs with support from the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So just words about Siemenpuu. So it supports civil society organizations in the global south, providing funding for their own initiatives in collaboration on the environmental and human rights. It's kind of grassroots movements. Hanna has a long career in civil society activism in movements in the global south. And yes, we should have had also Risto Isomäki here, but he's for some reason he's not here. I haven't heard of him, so let's see if he arrives. If he arrives, oh, good stuff. Well, without further ado, perhaps so as Sophie mentioned, we have something like about 40 minutes for this panel discussion first, and then let's continue that with the open floor afterwards. So when we are in this academic conference, and the first thing that comes into mind that what are we talking about? So if what do you take as ecological restoration? We, for example, we start from here.
Okay, so we actually had a quite good guest lecture on precisely this yesterday in a course that was also open, so maybe some of you have participated. So I think that we have to make a distinction between just the tree planting, which is one focus of our project, and ecological restoration as also looking at is the ecological functions of that ecosystem where trees are planted or trees are made to grow from the seeds that exist or the remains that exist or that deforested forest. So there are many different ways of making trees grow. So how is it improving the ecology and follow also those processes? So our other species coming in, bird life, water cycle is very essential in how it brings in clouds and rain and so forth, and revitalizing dried up streams. There are many different aspects which exist in the research on ecological restoration. I don't think that these two have been combined in this way, because if you look for them, do a Google search on ecological restoration and tree planting, you will find our project. And not much more. But there is a huge difference between a monoculture tree plantation and small-scale community-based agroforestry, as you and Markus have written about that as well, the agroforestry different landscapes. So it's not clear at this moment, and the concepts that exist are very vague. Even more so when we work from a social science perspective, on trying to make sense of the processes involved, the political processes involved in the different schemes, different applications of practices and landscapes. The human, non-human element is really important to investigate in order to understand, is it leading to positive effects? Is that land responding with its own agency, or is it degrading? So is it restoring itself, or is it degrading? So these concepts need to be clarified, I think.
To begin in order.
Yes, let's take that.
I have a kind of practical view of this. So in Brazil, ecological restoration is usually done on river sides. So the restoration, because it's quite expensive, there are big projects. It involves many times different landowners that has to be contacted. Basically in Brazil, so if a riverside, depending on the width of the river, there should be 50 to 100 meters of forest or kind of untouched kind of forest on both sides of the rivers. Okay, this doesn't happen. So usually the first kind of restoration projects that has already been done in Brazil for some 10, 15 years already is to do first of all, to get kind of landowners to follow the legal kind of requirements, and then to first clean up the water to get the springs back. That is, it's interesting, this mechanism that forest brings back water. You perhaps think the opposite, but it's when replanting and degraded areas, the water comes back. So it also gives more water flux, especially now when there's a lot of problems with drought in many regions and the globe, and very much in Brazil also. So the reforestation and already the river size brings back more water. And then with more extremes in the weather conditions, it also protects from increasing erosion. I mean, it's in all south of, perhaps globally now, we have problems with flooding because of severe rains, and we need this vegetation. This is very well understood in Brazil. So especially the richer states in Brazil has taken action to reforest these areas. So they are priority. So we don't have, for example, then this degraded, there's hundreds of thousands of hectares of degraded land in Brazil, but if we are in the Amazon and there is, it depends on the biome. If it's a rainforest, the forest comes back if the disturbance ends. Of course, it's a very different secondary forest, but it comes back to vegetation. Then if we're in the Cerrado, which is now the problem in Brazil, that after Lula fortunately was able to stop, or not stop, but reduce deforestation in the Amazon, the pressure of clearing land is in the Cerrado. It's about 40% of Brazil is the so-called Brazilian savanna, which is a much drier biome, and where soya and corn production is partially under irrigation, partially on natural rain. So the pressure in these areas are bigger. But anyway, so it's very much more difficult to do restoration work in a more drier climate, and that's why it is very problematic that the climate is getting drier. And one comment that I would like to say to this fantastic lecture of Jaya Ghosh is that unfortunately it looks like that the forests can only mitigate. They never solve these masses of CO2 in the atmosphere. What we need, I'm working with the Amazon forest, and we see already the problems with the actual, let's say, even though we have the forest there, it's growing slower because of drought, and it's growing slower because of fire, and it's not kind of capturing, even though it's an intact, more or less intact forest. Okay, 80% is some degraded to some degree, but it's at least 40 meters high, and there's trees there, but it's not capturing as much as before because temperatures are rising. And this is a huge problem, but it's not the topic of today. But let's remember that we need the forests now to create clouds. We need the forests to create, to keep the moisture in the atmosphere to reduce drought.
Yes, so yeah, there's this debate, like some people say that wilding or rewilding is a better aim than restoration. But then also there's like discussion that, you know, the aim should start from the local stakeholders, like what do they want, the local people, do they want production, for example. So normally the best solution is like agroforestry, ecological agroforestry in that sense, which is also kind of restoring like the hydro, the combating against erosion. And for example, I now visited a few weeks ago in the Amazon in Belém, this former 6,000 hectare palm oil plantation that had caught this disease because it's a monoculture, and it was abandoned by the corporation, and now it was a landless movement. So And they had adopted this model of like agroforestry there, agroecological producing, planting the Amazonian tree species like acai. And then they got rid of the problem with the ants. There's too many ants, for example, in those lands with monoculture, palm oil, and so on. So they are transforming it through those practices where they produce revenues and livelihoods for the people as well. So it's not just like creating these ecological corridors, as in some places, or reviving without people. So there's issues that have to be considered for this kind of socio-ecologically just ecological transitions or restorations. And then there's the issue with restoration that we are living within very rapid transformations. So the idea that we would be returning to something is not there really. You know, the macroclimate is changing. So like you have mentioned, like it's like the metabolism of the trees has changed. Like they have increased their growth in the past decades because of the increased CO2, but now we have reached like a threshold that trees actually start to die faster. So they are not the same trees as they used to be before. But still today, like most practitioners still think that we are living in a linear world where things would happen like in the same way as before, be fixed like these basic parameters, but that's not the case. That things are changing quickly, there are changes and so on. So in many cases, it might be better not to try to restore, like it's expensive. Also to do tree planting schemes as such, like from seedlings, but other just leave it alone, let regrow whatever regrows. Of course, it depends on place and context, so it's very context based. Serves every place, and it's not forests everywhere, like in Europe. It's not a place to plant trees.
Okay, there was already what's said. Perhaps Michael try to summarize now how I understood, not coming from academic circles, but from the practitioners, you could say, and working with the movements in the global south. But it's ecological restoration, it's on the ecosystem level, and then the tree planting might be the one way to do it, but as Markus already said, it's not always, and it's not the only way how to do it. And it's sort of somehow I would like to, perhaps in this panel later on, we could also talk what is not ecological restoration, because in order to understand what we are meaning and what we all meaning with that, it's also to understand what is not, because I guess that's the problem with all these new words what we have here with us, that they are used also differently, and then try to think about also that how we would phrase it in order to when we are talking about ecological restoration. And UN, as it was mentioned, there's this decade for ecological restoration, and they have made I guess it's 10 principles for ecological restoration, which are quite good anyway. And there they take also the point of that when we are talking about the ecosystems and restoration, and as Markus said, there's no way to go back to something. And then the ecosystems, there are also human populations around them. So we have to talk about the local populations when we are talking about restoration. And then we have to talk also about what caused the degradation. So there's lots of different things that we have to talk when we are looking at what we think about the ecological restoration. And along with these 10 principles, there's also I saw it just a week ago, I don't know when it has been, but beginning of the year, the FAO and IUC and also produced kind of standards for practices. I haven't looked at those for ecological restoration, but there's that kind of UN-led trying to define what is meant to be. And that's what I have seen. Quite a lot of that principles are anyway quite good way to start to define what is this. But then talking from the perspective of our partners, as Siemenpuu Foundation, we fund and support local organizations in the work. We work with the local communities and indigenous people's communities. Lots of the work, what they do is ecological restoration, but they don't frame it like that. It's not about ecological restoration. Nowadays, little bit, they know now the word and they say it like, but it's about the environment and they how to make it as a better conditions for them, and then to at the same time to protect the environment and to restore what is to be restored. And sometimes there too, it's about the tree planting, but then there's lots of other things what they do. And there comes also when we talk with the local communities, do we talk about ecological restoration, or do we talk about aspect forestry was mentioned here, or developing the farming systems, the energy access, that, and there's so many different things that you are talking about. You might be doing ecological restoration.
Yeah.
Sorry. Our online audience has requested that everybody use their big voices.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, okay, I will be like at home. I was just going to mention that I think that more than trees, it's actually water that we have to look to, and we're looking at ecological restoration. It seems like in all the places where people are working with processes of healing the land and bringing back life on the land, it's water that is the most important part. And tree planting is just a very trendy way of going about it right now. But I think that our project will look at it much broader, and we have actually one water governance specialist, which is Linda Annala. She did her PhD on water governance. So I see in all of the places that water is a very, maybe Brazil or Amazon exception, but because it's tropical, but in very many places, especially just also visited Chile with dried up rivers. So water is an important element, bringing it back.
Okay, you want to add?
Yeah, maybe like an important difference between this word restoration or tree planting in comparison to, for example, wilding is the agency. So who has the responsibility, who has the potential yields? So I think that's why there's so much emphasis now on this tree planting as a word, you know, like who is doing it, like companies, for example, doing it. So they can then imbue and gain the, you know, carbon credits, for example, for that. While if you do wilding, it's like the nature itself, like not, you know, process. So there's these issues in consideration here, you know, between the different concepts like restoration, like somebody's actually restoring it, while other concepts like wilding don't have that.
Two comments. This about the concepts. Even also about the countries. When for this seminar, I interviewed some of my colleagues about reforestation in Brazil. So they started to talk about tree plantations and agroforestry. So it's good to be kind of alert that it might mean different things in different countries, and it's also a question of land use. For example, I don't think kind of ecological restoration is, let's say, we are not yet there. I hope we someday will be there, but I mean there's so much still people in, especially in north, let's put it this way, the southern Brazil is more rich, and that's why it happens. It's less people are dependent on their small lots to produce food, and that's why we have more restoration there. And in the north, there is northeast, there is a lot of still poor people that needs to kind of from their 2 hectare, 5 hectares land get simply more income, and to do it in an ecological way, they do reforestation, which means that they kind of they get support to introduce an agroforestry system where usually the forest is not trees or fruit trees. And so so that the concepts are very kind of wide. So And then there is a new possibility which is called agro-silvoforestry. So basically the pasture land is planted with either eucalyptus or usually with jatoba, which is a native plant which doesn't use so much water. So you get, this is kind of reforestation. The background is simply to get a better revenue per hectare for the land. But in the same way, of course, it has an impact on CO2 sequestration. With these Mercosur European Union discussions, there is a big drive in Brazil to make that there would be a market for CO2 neutral meat, so that they can export like kind of environmental friendly meat to other parts. And this environmental friendly meat is exactly meat which is produced under these trees. So that's why I haven't seen much. I haven't personally seen it, but there's been a lot. I'm working with the project of Embrapa, the Luque, the kind of the agricultural agency developing agriculture in Brazil, and then they are talking a lot about this. And perhaps it is a possibility, but of course it will need more inputs of nutrients and water also. But in areas with enough rain, it should work.
Okay, thanks. So actually quite difficult to really, it's a very broad concept. And as in broad concept, it's we have to really be careful, as Hanna said, for example, that as many things go as ecological restoration, we really need to be like very strict in what kind of impacts they have. Others said as well. But what about the kind of there has been this, well, it's now the UN ecosystem restoration decade, and a lot of international effects, national effects, all these kind of things to plant trees, to restore land and all that. What is the big picture globally like? Well, let's say how much could we, for example, what kind of numbers are being discussed, and what kind of how much like could be, for example, mitigated climate change through this kind of thing? And what kind of global picture is we are seeing here?
I can just quickly say what I've read now as I go through my material is that the pledges that have gone out would cover many planets in terms of the number of trees that they're promising to plant. So that's one point, that like there's not really enough land to plant all this if we're not going to just like pick all people out. And the second part is that very many of these pledges, when they're actually brought into action, they fail, because planting in very degraded landscapes doesn't have that much success factor to it. So there again, like the tree planting part of it is highly problematic just as such.
I want to have a combination for that. Like, why so many pledges? Why is it like?
Well,
okay, could you open a bit that dynamic?
My work package is looking at the financial flows and also resources, so also knowledges, which I think is even more important, the transfer of knowledge from different places. The financial flows from global north to global south. And as I've gone through all the different financial schemes, among them the climate finance that was mentioned here, but many others, there are UN financial systems, there are equity-based, there are banking, banks, private financing, sustainable financing, green bonds, so forth, that is flooding the market of tree planting. So they need to place it, they need to invest it somewhere, because there's a lot of green bonds made, and to understand this landscape is a topic for our project. But then again, the actually bottom up, the ones that have been going on for a long time, like Siemenpuu and other NGOs and state funded and also grassroots funded, they're not included in these pledges. That's my understanding. The pledges are for the big financial markets for the financial investors, the institutional investors, the climate finance, carbon offsetting, all of that. The ones that are actually working with the communities locally, that are state funded, in many cases do not seem to be captured into this pledge system. Maybe Ethiopia is an exception because they've been quite forerunner as on a state level to pledge to plant. I don't know, maybe somebody else sees it as something completely different in that term.
I have again a practical view of this. I mean, plants are very visual, and it's kind of an icon of the green movement. But practically, plants are not used for reforestation, at least not in Brazil, because in the Amazon it doesn't make much sense because this forest starts to grow anyway, and in the Cerrado you have to first get rid of the grass. In some ways, it's usually species from Africa they use, and you have to kind of clear the land, and then it's sown because it's simply far too expensive to plant if you have a bigger area to do reforestation. So then you use seeds. And one thing that is in the last 15 years, these seed collectors networks that we especially the indigenous people are super good at this, and there's very nice projects where they have been trained to supply seeds for reforestation projects, because they know the places. You have to know where that tree is growing, you have to know when it produces seed. And then there's various techniques that you can with agricultural machinery do the seeding. So yeah, and so I have also understood there's a lot in Brazil. There's all the time there's looking for people for kind of for these international American and European organizations for tree planting projects. The problem is that to help the administration and to do it in a reasonable way is a completely different story. And so plants should be seen more like icons of the seeds that are actually used. Plants are used only for species which has extremely expensive seeds that you can't take the risk that some ants are going to eat them up, that you have to do. But this is kind of high level reforestation where there's money and interest to kind of plant rare species, endangered species, and somebody's looking that that tree is really going to grow there. Because of course, normally in any planting or seeding project, usually it grows very much different things there than original plant.
Okay, so
Yeah, so in the big picture, like if we look at the carbon emissions, like from the fossil fuels and so on, so replanting or reforestation is not a solution for that. You know, it's like climate scientist Michael Mann has shown that, you know, like it's very minimal potential that we have through tree planting or reforestation. You know, it's not like that that could compensate it. It needs to be cut down. You know, the emissions need to be cut down. It's not at all in the same, you know, we are not talking about the same kind of volumes in terms of carbon tons. And there's been research also on that, publications about that potential. That said, if you do start to do the tree planting or reforestation, that starts to immediately affect, you know, the local rain patterns, drought, all those issues. So it's really important. And of course, then it yields, like, you know, if when time passes, then it will have also global impacts. I mean, you have also research that shows that if you have a little bit of deforestation anywhere in the Amazon, that affects directly the you know, local precipitation if it's lower and so on. So, you know, it affects in the local region and the bigger region. So there's a linear relation there. But if we take like a long-term example, like when there was before the Europeans arrived to the Amazon, there was not so much forest there. It's now like 500 years ago. There was a lot of grazing grounds. There were a lot of people living there. It's a different kind of place. And then, you know, when colonization and diseases killed 90–95% of the people, it regrew. And now there's research showing that in the 17th century, small ice age was actually caused largely by that, you know, sucking of carbon by the big new forest in Europe. So that you have global ramifications with these changes. Like if you do it massively, So there is potential, but we are talking about a different thing. Like now, most of the land in the world is used for agriculture. So if that would change and there would be agroforestry, then at that scale, even like smaller changes would happen.
In terms of that issues or grasslands or.
So it's an important issue.
Yes, I guess one thing is that, of course, trees are important and they are very visible. So that's why they are also catching so much. 60%. In the climate change and in all the ecosystems, most of the ecosystem trees are very important for the water issues and what was already explained here. But they are also, I think, why there's so much funding now for these and then the intense discussion about it and or the interest in those. It's also about my theory is that when all the funders also it's this kind of result-based management nowadays what we have and what is sort of and then when counting trees, how many you planted, it's easy way to monitor what you have.
Remote sensing.
Yeah, and without even though you don't know what happens after, but you can count it, and it's sort of easy indicator that you have achieved something. So then it's easy for the funders also to put money for there because, and then if you talk about ecosystem restoration as a much larger way, it's much more difficult to give that kind of easy indicators that we have succeeded. So there comes this index. You need to have that kind of figures and indicators for your own funders and give stuff to show that you are doing something. So there comes this interest to the trees also. But there, coming back what Johan said also about the seeds and seedlings, just recently also the what it's called CIFOR, the Center for International Forestry Research, they just highlighted also the problem with the seeds and seedlings. But where do they come from and what is the genetic resource behind them?
Yes.
And if you are having these billions of trees planted, but what kind of trees they are, where do they come from? And they highlighted also that all the funders, they should also check when they are funding these planting schemes, where are the seeds and projects.
So kind of if we think that they're like, well, big variation in different kind of like what kind of things go under the rubric of ecological restoration, and we, as what you said, that there is big money stuff that is typically like not effective, and if it is, it's destructive in terms of plantations, and then there's this small scale grassroots stuff, community based, that is good, but that doesn't get money. So what do you see, how could we like move the stream of financing to the, or would that be a solution to kind of somehow shift the flow of funding to this grassroots stuff? Would that be possible? And if what ways, what should be done? Could be done.
The funding part, I have like a PowerPoint presentation also, and like go and pick out a little bit of it. I found it, I wouldn't say that it's like clear cut before we go into the field and look into this, because, okay, there are like on the private side, those that are not getting state funded, that are not state funded, there are like, I probably listed 20 NGOs that are quite new, that are dedicated to tree planting or ecological restoration in the global south. These are, some of them are most of them, these are market-based. They are selling chocolate to plant trees. They are selling cosmetics. Some of them are branded as more ecological. So they're connected to, for example, the brand Veleda, which is known as a cosmetics of natural cosmetics. And so what remains to be seen for at least for me is to see, do they have different practices as they go out to plant and to work with communities? Or are they also these NGOs, this landscape of NGOs that are like the middle hand between the financiers and the communities? are they just going with the old model, or are there differences? I wouldn't like take it away completely. It might be that some of them are actually doing some good work. We don't know right now. So that's also what we want to research, and that's why we have these case countries. We have 4 case countries where we will look into that. But in terms of what was the question? What was the question? Your question?
Yeah, how to
channel.
Yeah.
So what I really find like striking is that many communities are finding out, and individual people are finding out the practices. There are networks, there are internet videos on how to do certain things, permaculture teachers going around teaching. And then if you go into GoFundMe or other of these kind of grassroots funding, there's quite a lot of people who want to do the work and asking for funding. But these are not visible anywhere. So, and then also to know that if they're serious. So there is like a challenge of like the grassroots that are really eager and that have defined their goals, but then exactly like how to then create this trust and accountability and visibility. So there are like many different kinds of funding systems.
I participated in a seminar in it was Sao Paulo state, which is the richest state in Brazil, and so they have resources, but the same type of system is in this like a rich south of Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro state and Minas Gerais, huge areas like half of Western Europe, and so if it starts with that the local, usually local universities or the local research natural research stations define important areas to restore. So that's the first step. It's defined that this area needs for ecological, usually it's ecological corridors and for water quality and to reduce the impact of floods, that this area needs to be restored. So the next step for after that is that both environmental agencies and rural development agencies are involved in a project, that they build up a project that, okay, we need this kind of, let's say, 10,000 hectares of areas that needs to be restored. And then they need to get the local population who is living there. They have the usually rural areas which are not so rich. So they need to, it's question of land change. Okay, you cannot have, it's not grazing land, you cannot grow your corn here anymore, you cannot have your mandioca here. So they need to be compensated in some way. And usually they're built up in the way that, I mean, if it's a very poor rural area that there's, for example, there's no electricity access or there's no internet and this, that they say that, okay, and if we get this kind of this 100 meters of your shore side to plant instead of having this in agriculture, you will get to the village internet and a proper road. You can grow fruits and nuts in this kind of riverside area, and then you have a better access to the market, handicrafts and all kinds of things. And in this sense, there's a lot of negotiation. Usually that they try to do that. The material comes from it's usually paid. The funding in Brazil is usually kind of internal funding, that it's the state or municipality has funds for environmental restoration. Then the environmental fines, which are if you had the kind of, for example, if there is some solar panel kind of 1,000, let's say 10 hectares of solar panels, they have to, if you install a solar panel, you have to pay for cutting down the possible trees that there are. So there is some funding for these, and then there's sometimes external funding also from different funds and then they implement with this money this project, and at the same time it's also rural development which is done at the same time. So this is one model which is used in southern Brazil.
Yes, so this mentioned Embrapa Brazilian Agricultural Research Institute. It has, for example, mapped for FAO like the areas in the Amazon that should be immediately reforested. savanization. So those are like close by, they are marked by red, like they're close by to the river and so on. So those are like key areas where you should put focus now. But then the problem is there that you don't have the funding. I mean, they have the techniques, it can be made work there, like they are doing excellent research on that. But for example, then the funding goes to these big agribusinesses. So they go to soybean and, it's huge, funded by huge funds, but then the funds don't go really in the same quantity to these tree planting schemes. So it's like a battle. So I think that the issue is more like what to fund, but what not to fund, funding from the other things, and then the grassroots and the better options kind of search, because there's also many problems when you start to put a lot of money into, for example, these tree planting schemes, a lot of corruption, just wasted money. Like now I studied this one project there in the Santarin region. It has been there like for 5-7 years. The first 5 years are mostly like just wasted. They focused exactly on these tree planting numbers, like how many tree planting seedlings they distributed to the villages. They had hired a large team of engineers, forestry engineers doing the seedlings, a lot of money, millions in development aid. And then they just distributed the seeds in the villages who wanted to take them, and they never observed really if they planted them or if they survived. So they mostly died. Now they have changed the system so that only those families who are interested, so it's much smaller number of families, like 60, are involved, and they themselves come to the seedling ground to do their own seedlings. Of course, you have the expert there, so you should fund, the experts who can help them, the people who are interested, like grassroots experts traveling and the people. But it should come also from those people. That said, it's not always possible for them to do with them. For example, in the south from the Santarin region, in the high areas where the soybean expansion has been brutal and is still continuing, you have so much use of agrotoxics, pesticides, that it's impossible for them to do this agroforestry where you would need pollination by bees, because you always bring also the bees, like 60 cases of bees to be able to produce the fruit. But now they die because of the poisons. So you have to stop funding that the agrotoxics based, genetically modified corn and production for export, and then the forest can regrow, and those people can implement those projects that they are very eager to implement, also for their safety and health and gender equality, all those things.
Yeah, I guess what Markus here said was one of the keywords here was about the corporate interest. What is there, in a sense that, and many times in the development funding, administration, that like state administration, they are seen corrupt and they are seen not that good working, and then corporates are seen more effective and more result-based organizations who can do the work better than the like administration or something. So, but it's not the case many times because they have their own interests there, but they are good at getting the money also. And this kind of system, what we now have, is sort of serving this kind of corporate business much more than the other system. And then how to change that? So that's a good question, but I hope we will get the answer here. But then it's also that to highlight that problem better where it is, and then possibly there will be more understanding also in those big funds that what they are doing, and it's not possibly the best way, even though short-term result-based management ways lots of trees, but not the impacts are not there.
So,
Just a small comment that the locals suffer as well as everybody else for the corruption. So I don't think it's completely just to kind of say that everything is corrupt. It's part of the project to check that there's no chance for corruption. It depends a lot from state to state, and the problem of Amazon is that now it's colonialized by the rich southern part of Brazil. The capital comes from there, and the local community is only suffering from these soya fields and so. But in other states, it depends on the city, the agency, the city, the power structure, if it's corrupt or not. So it's good to see that there's a lot of people and there's a big struggle to fight corruption, and now it also narrow out this to have a little bit better situation for that. And I think I see it actually positively. They said that it's, that, for example, there's less corruption now than there was 20 years ago. So it's going slowly in a positive direction. I think that's good to mention.
In Brazil.
Yeah,
Okay.
So,
Last.
yeah, so two things to make clear. I think that Brazil, we heard it also here, it's a case apart from the rest of the countries that we're working with. Brazil is attracting a lot of attention because of the Amazon. So a lot of funding is going in already from the start, and Brazil has more funding itself as a state to channel into this. So I think that we will find completely different contexts in Madagascar, Mozambique, and Ethiopia that we are working with. Ethiopia has been a forerunner, as I said, state-driven tree planting. We have our colleagues who said that also at the university they're expected to go out and plant eucalyptus seedlings that we know that are sitting here in this panel that doesn't really make a good promise for the water balance if that is done on a large scale. So there are many issues there, and I wanted to comment on this also, the shift towards the corporate funding. Well, I also noticed as I went through this that it's on all levels of the funding, this neoliberalization of the development aid that we have already seen happening in all different, especially in Finland, push for that. Well, it's very clear that that is also part of the pledges of tree planting, that tree planting and aid will be somehow connected through the corporate system, the private financing of it. So, yeah.
The public-private.
Well, public-private partnerships.
Which means de-risking for the corporations. Yeah.
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 And as I said, I will keep it as an open question of the impact locally.
Yeah. So yeah, there are many things, and it seems to be that it's really like we need kind of some deep going systemic changes so that if it have to see like a good ecological restoration happening more in this kind of more part-time less. But now it's time to open the floor for the audience. So Barry, please, you have.
Thanks. I wanted to share a different approach and different experience. In my life in Britain, I'm a donor, owner of a whole range of rewilding projects, which are also recommoning projects, and which are also community wealth building and restoration projects in post-industrial sites. The key one is Langholm, which is on the Scottish borders, not very far from where I live. But that one, it was the largest community buyout of land in Scottish history. They had to raise many millions of pounds. They raised much of it from just public donations. A whole community organization, which in a city, a very small town in a remote area of Scotland that had lost its textile, the economy collapsed and they were depressed and didn't know what to do. And this, one of the largest landowners in British history, owned vast areas, and he decided to sell part of the land that he'd been using for grouse shooting and so on, very typical. But the Scottish law supported the first right of purchase by the community if they were so organized to do so. And so some of the big environmental and other rewilding organizations like the John Muir Trust, the Woodland Trust, and also the Scottish government weighed in with a few £1 million alongside a few £1 million from people like us. But it's all run by the community, and it involves all sorts of different uses of a very large piece of land, 10,000 acres. And it's being restored, but not in a monochrome way. There are multiple uses, some of it will be rewilded, some of it will be, there's all kinds of conversions going on in it, and also to generate revenue. But the community, it's not without people. The community are very, very involved in all the volunteer work. And by the way, not only in that one, but in the Borders Forest Trust, in the Woodland Trust in Northumberland, up in the Trees for Life, up in the Highlands at Afrin and such places, that the community owned and run nurseries. And volunteers go out, it's all volunteer. all of this is recommoning and all that, none of it's commodified, that. And they native seeds collected even from the montane, rare species, and they raise only those seeds and really en masse. Because some of these projects have been going for, some decades, and they've taken land that was degraded, given over to either deer or grouse or sheep, and there were no people anyway. It was just degraded land that had been destroyed. Yeah. And so that it's all, again, all of that is just, it's on a governance sector, which is a governance system, which is about rewilding, yes, and recommoning. Nothing to do with capitalism.
So I can comment on that. We had a guest lecture yesterday online about farmer managed natural regeneration. So I'm a little bit frustrated with this tree planting and seeds and all this, because we heard such an amazing story yesterday of Tony Rinodo, he's quite known in Africa. He came to Africa to plant trees, and he completely failed. And through his visions and work and contacts with locals, he learned to how to naturally regenerate the shrubs, that there is a network of forest underneath the ground, and how to work with that, and also how to work with the land so that the seeds that are naturally there sprout and start to grow back the trees. He was talking about, he had done a lot of the work in Niger and then Ethiopia. He's been working with World Vision. So also in Finland, World Vision is supporting some of the work in Ethiopia that he's been doing. One thing that came up about this commoning, and one question we had was, what happens to the land once it's restored? Because and who owns it? Because if it is common, if it's the community, if it's not land that has private property for the community, if the community is not protected in many of these places, other economic interests will move in once it's restored. So they have to negotiate also with the local government, so to create the protection. I've heard this in other places as well. You have to create the protection of these places, that once they start to have an economic value again, other interests will come and try to grab it. And this was something that he said, this is a serious threat.
Legally protect the recommoning.
Yeah.
Make a perpetual trust, so the land cannot be re-alienated in a commodified way. Absolutely right. I think all the projects I mentioned, they all do that.
Yeah, and so and also the word rewilding, as I've understood, is a word that comes from England. So it has kind of like been transmitted to other places about ecological restoration. I find ecological restoration as maybe a more like neutral term that doesn't bring in the history. Rewilding is also quite a lot associated with conservation, nature conservation policies, which then of course has the complicated issue of people. So then you have to like discuss what about the people, but to also understand that each of these words has its historic roots and its geographic roots.
Then, yeah.
Yes, thanks. I have a special question related to what you were speaking, especially for you, but then I have a more common question. The special one is that you were speaking about restoration along riversides. And my question is, who owns those trees thereafter? Because at least in Mexico and Central America, according to the legislation, riverside areas up till certain 100 meters, 200 meters, they always belong to the state. So
They have the similar legislation in Brazil due to the Portuguese colonization, and that's why the beaches are so wonderful in Brazil, because they never end, because it's all federal property, and they check that nobody builds their houses down to the beach. So that's why you can just kind of walk for weeks. But the riverside side perhaps not so interesting so basically it is federal property, the riversides. But I mean, if your farm is there, the farmers use it. And exactly this, that it is kind of by law, the federal, this is the way that you can motivate the population that, hey, first of all, this is technically this is not your land where you have been growing for 300 years, these crops, that this is federal land. And that's the way, that's why it's easier to start the process if somebody is kind of against that. We have this shed here, and so on and so forth. So yes, it is federal land. I don't remember. I think it's also depending on the width of the river.
My more general question is, you very nicely formulated the problematic in Brazil, but what are the general questions that you are going to ask in your project related to the different, because you told that you have 4 different countries, so what are you looking for? What are you comparing, or what kind of similarities and differences you are looking in those 4 different countries?
So we're looking at the the governance aspect of how much the communities can be involved in deciding in how these are defined, and the learning practices go along. We have a gender aspect of how is the gender playing out, and how is it impacting, and livelihoods are some of the key questions on the case country level. But I think it would really depend also that comparability in terms of what do we need to like assure that we work with the same kind of restoration projects, because you already heard that there are many different and the governance models are different. But also one thing would be interesting to see is that do they work differently in different countries if the funding is coming from the same place? So those are some of the issues. So we're connecting it also to the gender and like the poverty reduction or livelihoods, and so very much governance. Who decides what? When?
Who benefits?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to add something about that Markus said earlier. You mentioned refers like how there's the climate impact, like macro climatic impacts of when a landscape changes, and like there's reforestation because of some environmental change. And I wanted to ask you kind of like, for example, because Europe used to be like more savanna-like environment before humans came in and kind of killed the megafauna of through competition and hunting. And now there was a article in The Guardian like today about a research paper that I didn't have put into research yet, but how like 50% of tree planting in Africa is like done in savannas. So how do we kind of, and also the thing that we have a lot of like, we know that there's problems for like planting trees on like slums, and it's not great climate-wise or ecosystem-wise. So how do we kind of navigate what is the ideal state of the ecosystem, and what is the kind of like a reference or the baseline that we should aim to go to when we talk about these kind of ecological restoration projects?
Yes, I think it's helpful, then to think of restoration as something opposed to extractivism, where extractivism, you just pull out violently and destroy, and in barren areas, destroy the areas, where in restoration you are aiming to improve these like different aspects like hydrology, soil conditions, the fertility of the soil, microbes in the soil, and even the carbon capture there. But there it varies depending on the context. So it's very context-based. And then you're right, where do we put it? Like, what's the baseline? Where we are aiming to restore it. So that's why the word restoration is a bit problematic also. And rewilding might be better. And I think people are involved in that rewilding, that part of nature. So like recomponing, like Barry said. But yeah, so you have to be very careful, because there are these, look at the scientific literature, the technical expertise to know if you want to do tree planting or not. Like, for example, there's been now impetus to do tree planting in the Sahara, but that might not be good at all. It might be really problematic. You know, it might sound good, but you have to look at the, you know, the first studies and the experts and see what would be the impacts, and not look so much at, you know, what happens above the ground, you know, on that, but especially at the soil level also, especially about water levels, salinization, acidification, such issues, which are problematic, like when you plant like eucalyptus tree plantations, hundreds of thousands of hectares, then you have salinization, acidification, all of those kind of problems. So yeah.
One comment there. The good news is that especially usually kind of reforestation, these kind of projects are done close to original, at least the forest fragment. And even better, that's why all this connecting these forest fragments, and at the same time you're connecting the fauna and the seed flux and the genetical flux. And the good news is that it's surprising how after when the kind of destruction and disturbance stops, how and with a little bit of help of humans with planting, with seeding, how much the birds and the fauna brings species back. So in that sense, even in heavily kind of degraded areas, there's I mean, nature still works. It's not broken, the system. It's good this way.
Yeah, nature is strong. So
Yeah, strong.
Okay.
Yeah.
so it's like it will return naturally, and you can help it. Like you can do this mubuca thing, for example, in Brazil, you collect seeds in the back from the forest and the forest ground, and you bring it to the area, so it helps them. It's much better than, you know, tree planting. And then even in areas where you have like, which are like further away from the forest, like let's see these endless horizons of soybean plantations in Bahia or Mato Grosso in Brazil or elsewhere. There it might be not so problematic because then they can put a lot of fertilizers to the ground. So it could be actually a good place for tree planting, you know, because the ground might be still good, you know, the soil. So yeah, of course, and they have put like, so especially for being able to grow that seha. So it's not necessarily such a lost case, and it's more of a political will, even to do like grand changes in terms of like forest cover.
So another point is, of course, it's important to have the historic landscape, and I think it's one thing we should look into, but tree planting, reforestation, forests are also associated with colonialism. In Chile, we have 3 million hectares of planted forests, eucalyptus, pine trees, but they have been put right where the Mapuche indigenous communities are. So that is one issue. Once you have that kind of landscape, then the practices change and the communities change. In Africa, there are many pastoralist communities that are still living off that. And there is a huge struggle over the land. And tree planting is used as a way of controlling it, as is also the regenerative agriculture, which use pastoralism. I've also read on these topics that they are bringing in practices from the north to actually get the pastoralists to settle down, to become farmers and not pastoralists. So that is a major issue that I think that for us as social scientists, we can take a step back and look at those kind of changes. A really good question. And I think maybe Soledad will say something about what I was just about to say, so I will let you say that.
My next question was to that, usually in the case of Brazil, well, Chile also as well, you know, the south of Chile is being completely converted to eucalyptus. The whole indigenous lands of the Mapuche people are eucalyptus everywhere. Maria has researched a lot of that. But my question connected to the project and also to Brazil a little bit, it's how, and it might be a very naive question, but how the indigenous people are, in the case of Brazil, are they taken into account when decided what to fund or where to try to do a project with, you know, to protect land or to recover? how they are taken into account, how their views and their knowledges are taken into account in those situations. In the case of Brazil, but also in the case of the project, because you are going to go to Ethiopia, Madagascar, and those are also a lot of indigenous groups there. So, yeah, do you know anything about like how they are taking it? Are they called to give their opinion, to give their views, to propose some kind of indigenous knowledge to put into the projects or not?
Well, first of all, today, the situation is, I mean, especially now when Dula came back, but let's say that the last 20 years, the indigenous rights are more kind of established. I mean, they have more kind of right to their land, and which is even more important that they have, especially with better internet connections, and so they can, if there is intrusion into their land, of course, there's a lot of illegal loggers trying. They have big areas for, because I mean they are it's their land, so there's intrusions, and the FUNAI is which is the organization key, which is defending the or and now for the first time there's an indigenous person who is the Minister of Indigenous Affairs. So there's kind of a representation in government of the people itself. So the problem is I don't see very much, and they have of course a lot of projects with NGOs, the indigenous peoples. They're also well educated. There's quotas for indigenous peoples at the universities. This kind of the formal side is okay, but we have to remember that the indigenous people are nomads. I mean, the culture is that, okay, if there's some conflict or some other in the community, they go and leave, and they go to areas which are not defined as indigenous areas. And then there's kind of, and in the same forest, there is this, if they're close to areas which is at the agricultural front line, there is the farmers trying to invade that land too. I mean, there's still areas where which is not defined for anything special. So it's these kind of situations where there is conflicts. I mean, who was here first? It's this kind of conflicts, and it's not defined. And then there's the news are always now and then there's appearing this. Okay, there's a group of 50 indigenous people living here. And farming communities say that this is our land because it was in the 70s during the dictatorship. It was kind of commissioned as agricultural land. And it's those kind of situations that are kind of complicated and also come to the media.
So just on the governance side in Africa, I think that is one key point. That is one of what Anja asked before. It's to look at this. How are indigenous and local groups included in the decision making? In Ethiopia, I know we have challenges because actually the place where they have done most of the ecological restoration work is right now under conflict. And there is also discussions that is there, like, because there is hunger and there's this, like, there are accusations of genocide. It's very difficult, and unfortunately Linda is not here today to give more. She would know more, or also if we would be able to have our partners online, we could have it more. But there are places where there are open conflicts, and then how do we deal with that? So in some cases we will not be able to go to some places we would like to. And I just wanted to also say one more thing, and that is to always remember nature will not restore itself in places where it is under heavy desertification. And that is what I have seen in the last weeks in Chile. Rivers have dried up, it's dead landscapes, that turning dead. It didn't used to look like this 10 years ago, has a lot to do with the agro-extractivism going on. But also other things. So the human hand is essential, but how to use that human hand is also comes with responsibilities. And so, yeah.
And there's the issue of depth is decision making, like it starts from the ontological level. So for example, now there's this very strong framing of all of this as kind of bioeconomy ongoing in the Amazon in different countries. And the indigenous people are very much against that. They're saying, no, this is life. This is like a Western concept. We don't accept that. And then it's used like, you know, then outsiders come and grab, you know, they become like entrepreneurs, like bioeconomy entrepreneurs and stuff like that. And they even include the agribusiness there. And so it's very unclear what is this bioeconomy. And also the Brazilian landless movement, the farm workers movement, you know, MST, they are against this bioeconomy concept. You know, they say, no, it's a Western idea. So that's like, you know, you have to look at the ontological level. Then, you know, for example, FAO, it characterizes like the indigenous Sweden agriculture, rotating Sweden agriculture as deforestation, while actually they are doing you know, these home gardens in the forest with tens of different tree species, like 1 hectare, and then moving to another one. It's enriching the forest. It shouldn't be conceptualized as such. So there should be, you know, this lesson learning from these indigenous viewpoints on what is a forest and what is tree planting, and how to understand these things in the cosmologies more deeply. Like they always, when they do these like home gardens, they always plant trees and plants also for all the animals who come there, not just for themselves, and birds, medicine, everything. So it's like a whole package. And then, you know, the second level of the ontology is the economy. Then, you know, the economic power relations, how are those changed? Like the Brazilian landless movement, they are not participating in those schemes where Veleda or now these big companies come there and they pay some money like they do in these other tree planting schemes in the Amazon for the locals, and then they buy cheaply the raw materials, the you know, the essential oils from the trees or the seeds or so on. No, they want to do all the value adding process themselves. So and they have like specialized companies, consultants helping them to build up that chain, those cooperatives for themselves. So then you have much more power and decision-making ability when you control those chains. When you remain just with the, you know, as producing like the low value product, it's not very sustainable, you know, retainment of that forest, because it doesn't yield possibly so much for the locals. So they might at some stage, if the markets go down, if the company doesn't buy it, they might give it. So that's another thing, like, you know, considering governance and politics and decision-making power, like look at the ontological premises and then the economic setting.
Yeah, so actually we are time up now. So hey, there was lots of issues covered, lots of very actually diverse issues about this huge phenomenon and all that, and I think we got some initial answers to where to focus, what kind of things would be good, but there's lots of space to cover, and well, we are in our project where we have lots of work to do ahead of us. Of course, changing these big systems is a very long endeavor. But hope we can change something. Excellent. So I thank you very much, panelists and the audience and all that. So and the online presence as well. So let's give up.
And if you want to follow the activities of the Trees for Development project, because this is just one panel and what's going to be 3 years of interacting with these questions around ecological restoration, tree planting, green extractivism, we ask you to please check out our website. We have a mailing list that keeps you up to date on all of our activities. We are on X, Twitter, as it still hangs on. You can also find us under the same name on LinkedIn and Instagram, but there's nothing there yet, but soon. And then one other really exciting thing that we have that's launching this month, and I really invite everybody to come and check it out. But we are, thankfully, thank you to Helsinki Institute of Sustainability Science. We've been funded for a limited release podcast series. So for 10 months of 2024, we will have a monthly podcast that delves further into these questions of ecological restoration, tree planting, both at a general level and looking from our case countries. So you can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We're super lucky to be collaborating with the Global Extractivisms and Initiatives Global Extractivisms and Alternatives Initiative podcast, the Exalt podcast. So if you subscribe to that podcast, you can find us in the same stream. Our first one will be coming out at the end of February. And if you want to collaborate or know more, you can always email us at TreesForDev@Helsinki and you'll get in contact with me and I'll help you get in contact with whoever the right person is. So thank you.